All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Ian Oliver. Thanks for joining us here on Tracking the Tropics. If you can believe it, the last episode in July, a season that has started very fast. In fact, we're still running well ahead of schedule with 5 named storms and already 1 hurricane, of course. But thankfully, lately, things have settled down considerably. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what we were tracking over the last several days in the western Pacific. Today we have meteorologist Kerrigan Chauvin joining us from the CW 39. And of course we also have a Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Rebecca Barry. She's standing by over in our weather center to show you what we've been watching over the last several days. Rebecca?
Ian, it's pretty good when you can basically close out July with the conditions that we're seeing out there right now. And so we're pretty excited. Taking a look right now at what we're watching, we were watching this area of disturbed weather. It's now moving up the Carolina coast and offshore, but we were watching it very closely, especially over the weekend, because models were all over the place. Some of them pushed it back into the Gulf and redeveloped it. Some of them pushed it back out in the Atlantic and redeveloped it. But it ended up just skirting the coastline of northeastern Florida and southeastern Georgia and never developing. Those are our favorite kinds of systems. They're just rainmakers, no wind, no damage, and now it's headed out to sea just as basically a mess of rain. And so it's not going to develop, and that leaves us with pretty quiet conditions across the tropics right now, which is pretty rare for us, but we are getting into the peak of the season, of course. We'll touch on that in just a few moments. And with the Olympics going on in Japan, a lot more of us were watching the weather in Japan than normal, especially in the U.S. And so what we tracked and we were a little worried about was Typhoon Nepartak. And so it's crossed over the island now. It's just a low pressure system, and it's going to continue to meander off towards the west, just as a weak system with 25 to 30 mile per hour winds. And we learned some things because we got to watch this typhoon. We were talking about whether it was a typhoon or not. We were calling it a tropical storm. They don't use the same designation. And so that was just an interesting thing to learn about the different parts of the world, the different designations they use. They just use typhoon for all storms. They don't have a designation for the lower, like a tropical depression or tropical storm like we do. If it did gain strength and become more like a Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane in our terms, they might call it a super typhoon just to give it that different designation. And also different regions have different designations. There's one region that would classify this as a Category 3 typhoon, and so that made it sound like it was a stronger storm to our ears, where we're using the category system, but it's just not the same. It was basically a tropical storm in our designation, but it's a typhoon in the designation for Japan. So that was an interesting fact to learn more about as we are watching the Olympics and watching that typhoon make its way to the west. And as we make our way closer to our forecast and what's going on out there, it does look like we're going to see some conditions getting a little bit better over the next couple of weeks. And so I wanted to provide you with a hurricane hack. And so we've debuted a whole hurricane hacks episode, but we didn't get to touch on this. You can really use those summertime thunderstorms this type of year to evaluate where you might need to divert rainfall from your home. And so when we get those big thunderstorms that drop a ton of rain in a short amount of time, get your umbrella, get your jacket, head outside and do a walk around your house. It's going to let you see where the water's ponding, where it's gathering, where it's up against your house and not draining, because those are the areas that you might be able to do something about now that would make it much better the next time a storm impacts your area. And so at my house we have French drains. When the gutters come down, you don't want the water from your gutters, all that rainfall coming down onto the foundation of your home. It would wash out some of the dirt from that. It could cause some potential problems, especially when a storm's headed your way. And so if you can divert that rainfall out away from your home, that's going to be a game changer when we do get the heavier rainfall from the tropical systems. Also, you can make some changes in landscaping. A lot of the trees fall over. Of course, they're pushed over by the stronger winds, but when the water is so soaked that it's sitting in a soupy mess of mud, the roots just can't hold. And so if you can make some changes in landscaping so that the water's diverted away from the roots of the bigger trees on your property, you have a better chance of that tree staying standing when a storm runs through. You can also look at the way bushes are planted, and a lot of people have those stone dividers for their gardens. That can trap rainfall closer to your home. So evaluate those types of things around your home. That's your hurricane hack for the day, because it's something you can do right now when it's quiet to make it less stressful the next time a storm threatens and heads your way. Moving on to the tropical moisture forecast. Okay, so this is dry air. This is our friend. We have more moist air, of course, off the Carolina coast with that system we were watching, but dry air typically means quieter conditions. It does coincide with a plume of Saharan dust. We've had some really spectacular sunsets lately off the west coast of Florida, and we've had some Saharan dust to thank for that. That Rayleigh scattering really makes for some spectacular moments out there. But it is prime out there. We're looking at very warm sea surface temperatures. When we take a look at that long-term forecast, the good news is there's nothing in the long-term forecast that makes us worried right now. We're watching it. This is the GFS, and of course we're getting more moist air starting to swirl off the coastline of Africa, and so this goes all the way through next Thursday. Nothing too serious out there, and so that's our favorite kind of system, is when it's quiet out there, when we've got a nice stretch of quiet weather, and especially when we have dry air to thank for that. It's feeling a little more tropical locally, and when the tropics do start to heat up, we'll be using the power of Max Defender 8 to see through those storms when the storms get closer and we start to see those rain bands sweeping onshore. This time of the year, this is one of the areas to watch. This is what we're moving into, August. We typically get development over the Lesser Antilles, heading towards Puerto Rico and Cuba. Sometimes, and this depends a lot on where it forms and how it's influenced by the Bermuda high, because air goes clockwise around the high pressure that sits over Bermuda, and as it starts to shift to the north, we see less and less of the storms getting slung by that rotation into the Gulf, and fewer of them closer to Florida or up the East Coast. And so that's one of the areas to develop in terms of climatology. Moving into September, that's when things really crank up, and we're looking at very similar areas of development and very similar patterns. So it all depends on where it forms and how it's influenced by that Bermuda high initially, and then once it starts to get closer to the U.S., we see if there are any fronts pushing down that might push it out. And so there's just a lot of dynamics. That's why you have these two main areas of tropical development. And so I'm going to toss it over to Ian while he's going to talk about why things are starting to get a little more cranked up as we head into the next couple of months.
Yeah, we're glad to see that we don't have any tropical development expected over the next 5 days, but as we get into what I usually call the teeth of the season, August and September, that's the period where we typically see 2/3 of all tropical systems develop just in those 2 months as we head towards the statistical peak of the season that occurs on September the 10th. So although we have had a fast start to the season, it might feel like things have throttled back a little bit since we dealt with Elsa here on the west coast of Florida as that passed just off to our west. But we're actually still about a month ahead of schedule. In fact, typically you don't see your 5th named storm of the year until the end of August. So we're in the end of July, and we've had our 5th named storm in the rearview mirror for a couple of weeks now. So, Kerrigan, I know in Houston you guys are watching this closely. It's been so active over the last few years, and sadly, Houston is a place that's been impacted multiple times.
Exactly, and you mentioned Elsa, and I just have to say that although things are a little quiet now, they started off a little scary. We had those storms back to back to back, like you mentioned at the beginning of the season. Things started off with a bang. And whenever Elsa was making landfall where you guys were near Florida, we also were dealing with our own rainmaker that wasn't even considered a tropical storm, a tropical depression, anything like that. We were just dealing with a general low pressure, a broad low pressure system that provided over a foot of rainfall for some locations for the month of June and going into July as well. We just saw an excessive amount of rainfall in the southern end of Texas, even going up toward areas like Galveston. Us here in Houston, we saw one of our top 10 wettest Julys on record, wettest Junes on record. So we've been seeing the rainfall, not exactly the storms, but the rainfall. We've been seeing that tropical feel to our air for quite some time here.
And of course, yeah, that's a ringing endorsement of the issues that tropical moisture can present. You don't always need a well-formed tropical system to create some big problems. We had parts of our area from Elsa, which thankfully spared the worst. Tampa Bay was spared the worst of that storm, but even said, you got inland parts of Sarasota County, places that saw 9-10 inches of rainfall. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a big-time powerful system to generate those huge rainfall tallies.
No, and a lot of the weaker systems, because the rain isn't evenly distributed around that center, you get those big chunks of moisture, so to speak, that break off and then just sit over an area, and that's when you get the flooding rainfall like Ian was just talking about that we saw in inland Sarasota County. So I'm hoping that you guys don't have to deal with another tropical system over there, Kerrigan, but unfortunately we probably know that you're at least going to be in the cone at some point as things start to get cranked up.
I mean, it's inevitable at some point, right? We're in a bit of a lull right now thanks to that Saharan dust, but normally that dust dissipates going into the end of August, beginning of September. That's whenever we start to see those storms ramp up again as we head into September. So once that dust subsides, it's really going to allow for that tropical activity to originate a little bit further out into the Atlantic, closer to the coast of Africa. And then we're going to see those storms start lining up, most likely similar to what we saw last year. Because this dust is not a new topic. It happens every year, and we have to keep that in mind. Although things are quiet now, I love that tip that you gave. While things are quiet, now is the time to go out and make those preparations before they inevitably ramp back up during the peak of the season.
That's how you take the stress out of it, right? You take care of everything while things are quiet. On your screen right now is the season forecast, and you can see where we stand right now. 5 named storms, as I mentioned, and of course that 1 hurricane. Now, the new averages, which those changed this year, the National Hurricane Center bumped those up from the climatological norms that we see from 12.6 and 3 to 14.7 and 3, partially because we've seen a little bit of additional development, but also because satellite technology has gotten so much better that we can essentially detect everything that develops out in the tropics. But yeah, those numbers got bumped up a little bit. The forecast has been for a well above average season. We started out hot. It was a fast start to the season. Don't be lulled to sleep by this little quiet stretch that we've been enjoying, because things typically ramp up quickly. We know how fast that can happen as you head into August and September.
It feels like once you get in that pattern, like once that first thunderstorm rolls off the coastline of Africa and starts swirling and we start tracking it for days and days, it seems like a conveyor belt. Like, here comes the next one, here comes the next one, here comes the next one. And they don't all head our way, they don't all stay together, and they don't all form. But it just feels like by the time late August rolls around, you just got to start watching the Atlantic.
Almost to that time period, but thankfully this is not that episode of Tracking the Tropics. This is the one where we say it's the end of July and things thankfully are still quiet. But you did show those development zones. You might say, why aren't we seeing anything out there? And as Kerrigan mentioned, a good part of that right now is some of the Saharan dust, very dry air, and also some wind shear that we've been tracking across a good portion of the Atlantic basin. That typically puts a lid on things, shuts things down, at least in the short term. We typically tend to start running out of that through the early part of August, at least the Saharan dust. Activity starts spiking. What are you looking for this time of the year to generate tropical systems? You need warm sea surface temperatures. That's why early in the season you're looking at places like the Gulf, where the 3 of us live, and I think probably a good portion of the folks watching live. Warm water in the Gulf early season. You get the Gulf Stream. You get parts of the Caribbean that have very warm sea surface temperatures where you can generate tropical systems. Once you get into August and September, it's been summer for a while.
Yeah.
There's warm water everywhere. There's tropical moisture everywhere. And essentially the whole basin starts to light up, and that's what leads to that big spike.
And we want to hear your hurricane hacks too. Some of the best hacks that we have came from you, so you can use those hashtags, Hey Ian, Hey Rebecca, or Hey Kerrigan. That's how we're able to see your comments. And so you can share your hurricane hacks with us. Do you guys have any favorite pre-hurricane activities?
Uh-oh.
Is this a question for me, myself?
Yes. What do you do?
Okay, so, oh man. I mean, Ziploc bags have to be your best friend, correct? They keep everything dry. So all your important documents, I'm thinking of pictures, things that money can't replace. Put them in a Ziploc bag and keep them safe. That's going to be my biggest hack for you guys. Also, another thing, I have a dog, so he is the first thing that comes to my mind whenever I'm thinking about storms, is what I'm going to do with him. What a pain it's going to be to evacuate with him in the car as well. And if you're at home, I know that he does not like to go out to use the restroom whenever the grounds are wet, or maybe the grounds are dangerous. There's debris on the ground. So what you can do here is my puppy hurricane hack, is get a kiddie pool and fill it up with sod or fake grass. So he still thinks that he's going to the restroom in the nice lawn, but really it's confined, it's safe, and it can be controlled to where he likes it. So we don't have to worry about any messes during the storm.
And those kiddie pools sell out right before a storm in areas that are in the cone. So you might want to get that kiddie pool early. I think we keep ours in our attic right now. It's just so that we can just pull it out and put it in the garage.
Hot commodity.
Yes.
Yep. Speaking of hot, this is the Gulf of Mexico. You see these sea surface temperatures now in the mid-80s. We talk about kind of 80-ish as the threshold where you can really start to see tropical activity and formation development taking place. As you can see, the entire Gulf is open for business. Essentially, most of the basin at this point is at that mark, getting to that kind of bathtub level. I think Clearwater Beach, our latest,
Oh, yeah.
91, I believe.
We hit 92 yesterday during the peak of the day, and then by the time the evening, it had dropped back to 91. But
There you
that's
go.
just,
And we're dealing
stinky.
with a west wind right now off the Gulf of Mexico, so it's painfully muggy. We had the early showers and thunderstorms. That's just an indication of what tropical moisture feels like. We'll take it in this form, showers and storms around, not tropical systems, and we're not expecting that, at least for the next 5 days. No tropical development, just don't expect that to be the case much longer as we move on through August, which activity typically starts to spike.
Feels like a stolen week. Whenever you get quiet conditions this time of the year, it feels just like, whew, I can breathe
Crossing
easy.
another week off the calendar in
Yes.
hurricane season.
I love that because I can honestly go to any man on the street at this point and he can give me the forecast for tomorrow. It's hot, muggy with a chance of afternoon storms. It is, you have to get creative with our morning show right now, thinking about ways to ramp up the forecast a little differently, but at the end of the day, hey, it's the same thing. Another thing I want to know, you brought up those sea surface temperatures there. When we have to go all the way to the other side of the globe to look at any type of tropical development right now, and the sea surface temperatures near Japan are going to be warmer, and that actually has a point as well with the amount of typhoons that they see compared to hurricanes. Every year they actually see more of them develop on that side of the globe compared to us, and the main reason is because their waters are much warmer. They're sitting in the upper 80s, pushing 90 degrees right now in their basins.
It feels like Tampa Bay and Houston and Tokyo lately.
Yep.
They've been dealing with those temperatures.
We can identify with that.
And Sebastian, I think Sebastian is driving the bus today. JB has earned some much-needed time off, so I think
He's
we have
fishing.
some. Yes, I think he's doing a pretty good job of it. Him and also tracking the tropics meteorologist Amanda Holly. She just posted a picture. Her and her husband Wayne looked like they had a pretty good haul of.
They got some
lobster.
lobster.
Yes.
It's lobster season.
And the Keys right now, lobster season. Jealous.
So jealous.
I think we got a question. All right, so this comes from June Ann Moss, and I think this is coming from the WFLA Facebook. It is. It says, "Hey Ian, are we waiting for the other shoe to drop?" Yes, so essentially are we waiting for the inevitable? And yes, this unfortunately is the case. We're now finishing up July, so that's 2 months out of 6 months of hurricane season, but these aren't the 2 busy months. Like the last month, it's really the next 3 that we have. August, September, first part of October, especially here in Tampa Bay, where we do see a bit of a secondary peak through that early part of October, where you can get some troughs into the southeastern part of the United States, which can push tropical systems from the central Gulf over towards our coast, which is a dangerous period for us. We always have to watch that time period very closely. But yes, unfortunately, we're at 5. You saw that forecast from the National Hurricane Center, which I can pull back up for you. But this is essentially making my point right here. You see June and July. This is a typical season. There's almost nothing going on. We've had 5 named storms already, which is already well ahead of schedule, a very fast start to the season. The peak coming on September the 10th, so the second half of August, especially, and then into that early part of September being the peak of the season. That was the season forecast from the National Hurricane Center in NOAA, 13 to 20 storms, 20 on the high side, of course, the average being 14 now. We're well on our way.
I feel like we're going to make the forecast handily.
Yes, so we got 5 named storms already. We have 4 months left to go in the season, and as you mentioned, oftentimes it doesn't take long. You get one storm. Once we get into the heart of the season, it's essentially we change where we look over towards the main development region, that area of the Atlantic between the Lesser Antilles and the coast of Africa. You get these tropical waves rolling off the coast of Africa, one after another, and essentially almost all of them, depending on the conditions, have an opportunity to develop. So it doesn't take long to start checking names off the list once we get into this part of the season.
No, we've got some more questions. Let's check them out. All right. Are we going to have La Nina again? And so Ian and I were actually talking about this because the other hemisphere was showing some signs of oscillation and people were monitoring that. But right now we're in that kind of neutral zone.
Yes. And there isn't really right now a huge indication one way or the other, which is good. Of course, it's not a strong La Nina, which would crank up activity. That was kind of where we were at last year, where it was just kind of a hotbed for tropical development in the whole basin. That's not the case, but it's also...
It's not the best news.
Right.
We would love some storm crushing conditions out there, but
Yes,
that's just
I like
not
that.
happening. Not happening right now.
Doing that for the time being. So at least we have that.
And do we have one more question? No? Okay, perfect. And I feel like, Kerrigan, this time of the year as meteorologists, because we are getting into the peak of the season, whenever you try to make, your friends call you and try to make plans like, hey, you want to go here this weekend? You're like, maybe, possibly. We'll see.
My gosh. Yes, I actually have my cousin, she's planning for her wedding. So we have a lot of bachelorette events that are all planned from the months of September, October, and November. And I said, oh no, you know you're inviting a meteorologist here along the Gulf Coast. This is going to be a hit or miss schedule that we have, but let's just cross our fingers, hope for the best.
I'm sure she assumes you can just get that fixed up anyway, no problem.
They don't understand. They don't
That's
understand
how it
the line
works.
of work.
Getting into the peak of the season, it reminds me like the things that are easy wins. You can do things like go ahead and stock up on batteries because you're going to end up needing those anyway. Your remote is eventually going to run out of batteries and you're going to need it, and that just saves you one more trip. Anytime you have to make that trip to the store when your area is already in the cone and it's getting close and you know that you're probably going to lose power, that just adds stress that you do not need. And so especially this time of the year, the easy wins like propane, you're going to end up using it, or charcoal if you're a charcoal guy. And so propane, charcoal, batteries, anything that you absolutely know you're going to need and you're going to use anyway, why not just go ahead and stock up on that on your next trip to the grocery store just to save that extra trip. And then we have some things that also help you out because there are some things you don't think about, and then you have to make the last minute trip either when the storm finally clears and you finally find a place that's open. Are you able to light your grill? Do you have one of those grill lighters that's fresh and good still? A lot of people have to make that last minute trip out to get a lighter to light their grill so they can cook food once the storm passes and they don't have electricity. And then also those power banks to keep your battery, the cell phone battery charged. Those are big sellers right before a storm, and you might end up having to buy a higher priced one because they're out of the lower priced ones if you don't go ahead and stock up on that. So that's some of my other quiet time hurricane hacks.
We'll take one last question. We got this from Craig on Twitter. He said, hey Ian, hey Rebecca, hey Kerrigan, how does the insanely active 2020 season change the mentality for all of us heading through the rest of this season? I think that's a good point. A lot of folks saw last season what happened, especially in Louisiana, one storm after another. So that kind of just reinforces what you were saying. Use this time now, the quiet time, because we know it's not going to stay quiet like this a whole lot longer.
No, and it might not be the same area like Louisiana that gets hammered, but a lot of times when you get multiple storms firing up back to back, because we're still in the same weather pattern with the position of the Bermuda High and how the fronts are shaping up across the rest of the U.S., it does often impact similar areas. And so 2020, of course, was an explanation point on that, but it does certainly make you think. And also, once again, if you can just do a little bit early, it's going to help you out.
All right, Kerrigan, any final thoughts before we wrap up on this episode?
I think looking back at 2020, we learned a lot about preparedness, and it wasn't just in terms of the weather. A lot of things happened last year that made us just become more aware that we need to be prepared for practically anything at any time. So if you're not prepared for this upcoming hurricane season, go ahead and do so now. Like we've been saying this entire time, while things are quiet, go ahead and get what you need, because it does not take long for shelves to sell out. For people to get worried. There's a lot of psychology on the backside of why people clear out the shelves as soon as they hear certain trigger words whenever a storm is approaching. So go ahead, take all those precautions that you need to do ahead of the storm. And that's about the only thoughts I have moving forward. Thankfully, things are staying quiet for us now, and that we have to look on the other side of the world for activity. And hopefully it stays like that for a little bit. Hopefully no one has to track anything, but hopefully it stays away from the Gulf Coast.
Good advice. Yeah, you saw the forecast.
Fingers crossed.
Keep them crossed. The forecast is for a way above average season. The activity is going to ramp back up at some point. So for now, enjoy the quiet time. We'll, of course, be keeping our eye on the tropics as we do here on Tracking the Tropics. We've got regularly scheduled updates always here, Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. And weather permitting, of course, anytime there's a significant update in the tropics, we're on here letting you know about it. So for Rebecca, for Kerrigan, thank you so much for watching today, and we'll see you next week on Tracking the Tropics at 2 o'clock.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.